I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to our Insider Insight Show. I'm honored to have back with me someone I consider a very dear friend and, frankly, I believe one of the best authors, writers, journalists, and historians, not just in the United States. I might be a little biased, but I say the world. And the reason why I can comfortably say that is because of his works that are already on the, no pun intended, books. Bob is a very prolific author. But what separates Bob and his work from others is his detail-oriented research on the particular issue he's investigating. And then there's another side to Bob Wilcox. Many people that will do research and come up with some findings that might not be what the mainstream would want out there. Many people will then say, "Well, I don't want to put that in my book. I don't want to discuss that in my interviews because, well, it's not going to be well received by the powers that be." And in the process, they might sell more books or they might get more interviews, but in the process, they don't tell the whole truth. And that's where Bob Wilcox is so different because he's going to tell you what he found out. He's incredibly courageous. We're going to talk about two of his books today, Target Patton and Japan's Secret War. Now, for those of you not familiar with Bob Wilcox, he reported for the New York Times, the New York Post, and many other major dailies, magazines, as well as websites. His other books include Scream of Eagles, The True Story of Top Gun, The Truth About the Shroud of Turin, JFK, The Spy Who Killed Kennedy, and the two books we're going to discuss today, Target Patton and Japan's Secret War. His website, I encourage you to go to his website. Books are available there. Robert K, as in kangaroo, Robert K. Wilcox, WILCOX.com. Bob, welcome to the Insider Insight Show, Operation Freedom, at DaveJanda.com.
Well, thanks a lot, Dave. That's a great introduction. Gee whiz, I don't know if I can live up to it, but...
oh, you already have.
Really appreciate it.
You already have, Bob. So, Bob, let's talk about Target Patton.
Okay.
It's a fascinating book. And it is truly a deep dissection of the man, George S. Patton, but also about how he died. Because, let me give you the standard scenario, Bob. You know what's coming, and then you can tell us what really happened. He was a brilliant tactician, which he was. He was incredibly courageous, which he was. He was an incredible patriot, which he was. But how unfortunate. After the war, he was celebrating the war's end. He happened to be in his Jeep, and there was this freak accident where his Jeep was impacted, and the poor man, well, he died. Now, some people believe, he died on the scene. Other people believe he had such catastrophic injuries, he was brought to the hospital, he tried to fight through those injuries, and the poor man he died from his catastrophic injuries. Okay, Bob, give us the real deal.
Well, that's the exact feeling I had when I got into this thing. As you explained, I'm a writer. I'm looking for books and things to write about. And I thought he died in an accident in a Jeep, and like everybody else. And my cousin he has an international detective agency, and we're out working out one day, and he says, "Oh no, Patton was murdered." And I said, "What do you mean Patton was murdered?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I know the guy who did it. And he's worked for me." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. If this is true, it completely overturns everything that I know. And let me know who this guy is." And the guy's name was Douglas Bazada.
Mm-hmm.
And he hired Bazada to do work for him, special stuff. He would go over to Israel and get involved with tough guys and pull people out who needed it and so on. And so I went and actually found Bazada, and I'll say right now, I don't think he would have ever said and told me what he did if he hadn't have had a stroke. He was just, he'd had a stroke. He was just not, he didn't have his defenses up. And what a guy this guy, Bazada, is. He was the original, our first special forces from the OSS. This is way, way, way back, were the Jedburghs. And these were extremely tough and smart guys who were dropped behind enemy lines, specifically in France. Before D-Day, they helped the Maquis fight the Nazis, and most importantly, stop the German army from getting up to Normandy and elsewhere when D-Day came. And this was Bazada after the war. And by the way, when I met him, what a guy. I mean, big, strong, tough-looking guy, but very debonair. He looked like a British colonel, but when he talked, he had this New Jersey accent, you know, so that's where he was born. His father was a Presbyterian minister, went to Princeton and everything. This guy became a hitman. He became for the government, and that's a long story. He started in, you know, as a Jedburgh and so on, but then after the war, he had his own group in Europe, and they would go into the Soviet Union, and they would do things for all governments, including Americans. This guy had a background like you would not believe. So after meeting him and hearing his story, and I spent 2 weeks with him, and he gave me all these diaries that he had written. He'd had a terrible time as he got older about his whole life and what he'd done, and also about Patton and what he'd done. So I went to the National Archives. I checked him out. He was sterling. He'd won DSC, Distinguished Service Cross. He turned down higher honors. He was, everything he had told me was true about his background. So I started researching Pattons Death, and I'll tell you, that was a very strange accident. And I'll say that Patton had been banished. Patton was our greatest general, as you explained to me. I think probably in our history, he was one of our greatest. And he'd been banished because he wanted to fight the Russians. He actually had German troops that were ready to go and invade Russia. He didn't want to go and take over Russia, but he wanted to stop them. He hated the Russians. So here in 46, no, it's 45, it's late 45, Patton is banished. He's doing a history thing. He hates it. He's going to go home. He's going to write his memoirs. And most importantly, he's going to tell some of the secrets of World War II, which are incredible. We could have ended that war in probably 1944 late. Patton did the most incredible thing. He swept the Germans off of after D-Day. They held him back, by the way. He was going to be the head general in D-Day, but he opened his mouth and said something bad about the Russians, and so they made him into a diversionary tactic, which worked great. The Germans didn't care about anybody. Where's Patton? Where's Patton? Well, he was somewhere way, way off of D-Day, so they didn't worry, and we got a foothold. But then it started to bog down, and the first thing that happened for Patton was he had a chance to destroy most of the German army right there on the French coast at Falaise, and they stopped him. They stopped him for pure public relations things. The English wanted to kind of take ahead. Montgomery wanted to be leading the charge. Montgomery couldn't get his act together, and the Germans broke out. So they stopped him there, and then when he chased them right to the edge of France, right at the German border, it's still in the, it hasn't started to rain yet. I forget it's not autumn yet, just at the crux there. And they steal his gas because Montgomery has another dumb plan called the Bridge Too Far. You probably saw the movie where they want to go in and take Berlin, but it never worked. And Patton sitting there all for 2 months without his gas. He can't do anything. And by the time they give him his gas back, it's too late. The winter has started in, and his tanks are getting down in the mud and everything else. He still went ahead. But anyway, Patton could have won that war early. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest thing that we have to, and I won't go into the accident, which is, I will, but just to say first, Patton was going to tell all of this.
Yeah.
And so here he is. It's the last day he's there in Germany. And by the way, there have been three attempts on his life before this, mm-hmm. and I'm convinced they were people had begun to say, we got to get rid of this guy. And that's where I go back to Bazada. Mm-hmm. Bazada was pulled in after this Jedburgh time that he had. He was pulled in by Donovan, the head of the OSS.
Now, the OSS later became the CIA, correct?
Exactly. Okay. This was mm-hmm. the forerunner to the CIA. Mm-hmm. He was pulled in, and the reason they stopped Patton at the border there was they wanted to allow other things to happen. Eisenhower, who was not a good general, but a great diplomat, he's the one who wanted to stop him and let Montgomery do that. So Patton is stopped there, and I just forgot where I was going with. Oh yeah, so Donovan says to Patton, says to Bazada, we got to stop this guy. And this was the beginning of stopping and taking his gas. Mm-hmm. And it evolved out of 8 meetings, Bazada told me, to where in the end, Donovan sort of is tearing his hair and saying, Douglas, we have to stop this guy, and I don't care how you do it. He needs no longer to be stopped. He needs to be silenced and done with. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. that was... through these 8 meetings,
he called a hit. He called a hit, Bob.
Absolutely. And you don't find they don't write these things down.
No.
They don't
no.
Make a memo, hey, this is to kill Patton.
Yeah,
you
right.
bring the guy in,
right.
You bring the guy in and you say, oh, like Donovan did, oh my gosh, he's a great general, but the war is over. We just don't know what to do. He's going to screw up all our plans. I don't know what to do, Douglas. What do you think we ought to do? And Douglas actually said to him, you mean kill him, sir? Oh, well, whatever you have to do. And that was the meeting, the 8th meeting in which it was planned. And what Bazada told me, as I said, Bazada had a stroke. He just told me this stuff.
Yeah, well, his filter, common in stroke patients, their filters get distorted. They get to a point, they just start saying things, but some people that have strokes start saying things that, well, there's no filter.
He just didn't care, Yeah. He was just telling me, and he never in a million years would have told me. So he gets this order, and by the way, it's all, I took 40 diaries of his throughout his entire, after he got out of the business of hitman. You get too old for it, you just can't do it. And he'd already been compromised, and he killed a lot of people, and for the government, for various governments, and so on. And it killed him in the end. He had great, terrible tremors over it, and he'd write these diaries. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't live with myself, and so on and so forth. So I had all these diaries backing this stuff up. So anyway, he was given that order, and he was actually stationed near Patton in Germany. Patton had been put somewhere, I forget the name of the place now, but it's in Germany, and he was writing histories, and he hated it. He was leaving. And they had this one of his aides, who I still don't know may have been involved in this or not, but said, let's go hunting. So they go down, and they take these quiet roads. There's the turnpike. What do they call them? The freeways.
The Autobahn. The Autobahn.
Yeah, the Autobahn. Excuse me. And it goes by Munich, not Munich. One of the big cities there.
Frankfurt.
I'm forgetting it. But it's a lonely road, and there is what was set up was there was a truck waiting for them to come down. Bazada set this up, he said, and they're coming down this lonely road, and it's got all kinds of war damage around it, old tanks and stuff. And Bazada's behind this place, and he set it up that they're going to turn the truck when it sees Patton's car coming. The truck is supposed to start going towards it, and just as it gets to it, it turns in front of it. That causes the car to have Patton wasn't going very fast. He's going very, very slow, actually. The car has to move. The truck turned into him, and it didn't turn anywhere. It's just on a lonely road to a place where Bazada and a Russian, he told me, were waiting for him. And let me go back and say that, and this is, if there's anything that's the weakness in this story, it is this, but I've thought about it. There's so many other things that it doesn't hit it. But Patton, Bazada followed Patton before they went to do their hunting trip. Before this happens, they stop and see a old castle that Patton wants to examine. They park the car and leave it and go to the castle. They walk up the mountain and go to the castle. Bazada said he came there and he did something to the window, the back window, so that it would be open. Now, when I first thought of this, and I've seen the pictures of the car, of the car, I figured, how could this, that's a pretty tough thing to do. But the back of this 1938 Cadillac that Patton is in, it's a limousine, has 3 sets of windows. Main windows were in the front, and in the back there are these smaller windows that are you can pull them out. They're almost like a flag, almost. And all you do, he didn't tell me what he did, but you break something there and it can't close.
Okay.
So they come back, and he left, and now he's setting up the accident. And this car is coming down this lonely road, and Mannheim, that's the name of the city, by Mannheim. And the truck is waiting with 3 people in it. One of them is a guy named Thompson. He's kind of a ne'er-do-well black marketeer. They bought him off, said Bazada, and gave him some money and so on. He is to crash into this car, into Patton's car. There's a guy in front of Patton in a Jeep who has Patton's dog in that Jeep with them. And he subsequently leaves, and we never hear from him again. Another mystery of this thing. But they crash into him. And at that moment, Bazada, who is a world-renowned shot, this is about a 50-yard shot. Maybe I'm exaggerating it. Maybe it's a 20-yard shot. It's closer than 50. And he shoots not a bullet, but some kind of rubber bullet thing, and it hits him in the neck, says Bazada. And there are 3 in the Patton car. It's a light hit. The car is turned. Nobody else is hurt, but Patton ends up on the floor of the car with a broken neck. And this is, you can go through all the different things. You have to read my book to really get into it deeply. But Patton then, he is taken not to a local hospital in Mannheim, which I would think would be the first thing you'd do.
Right.
But they take him an hour away to a huge hospital, much further down, and I'm forgetting the name of the town where it is, but they take him there, and at first, when Patton goes in, he's in bad shape. You as a doctor would know more about this, but he also he himself asks that there be guards posted out in front of this room that he's in. I never figured out, I never could find what that was. But Patton is first put in a huge situation where they actually put things on him and stretch his body, stretch his head, so that I guess the idea is you're keeping the vertebrae away from each other.
Right, to lend stability to the spine. That would be the plan, as long as you have enough weight on. I mean, you have not too much weight and not too little of weight. Right.
Well, you know more than I do about that. It's thoroughly explained in the book, which I wrote 10 years ago. So that's why. But he doesn't like it, but he's a really gutsy guy. They have hooks in his cheeks to support this thing. And finally, another doctor is flown from America, and he says, "Get rid of this." And they do something else, and Patton has a rapid recovery. He's getting so good that he says, "I'm going home. I'm going to fly." And in those days, in 45, I mean, the flight would have been 15 hours, so he had to be in pretty good shape. He gets ready to go, and the night before he leaves, he has a sudden downturn, and he dies of what they call bubbles in the blood. You'd maybe know the name of it, but what I am told happened by Bazada, who said the NKVD got in there, put on their doctor's caps and so on.
And this is the predecessor to the KGB.
Yes. The NKVD is the predecessor. Okay. And their method of killing people they love car accidents, because if you don't get the guy, you can get him in the hospital, and it's easier than in the auto accident. You can then go to the hospital and get him with something that will kill him, and it'll look like these bubbles in the blood. So that was also a Patton grandchild went to Europe, and she was she met an NKVD, he would probably be a current guy. This happened maybe in the 70s, and he said, "I know this story." This NKVD guy said it did happen that way. So that's two corroborations there on that. So anyway, he had a sudden downturn and he died. And there's no autopsy on Patton. He's the highest ranking general in Germany, and they don't do an autopsy. Now, his wife is the one who didn't do the autopsy, but she was coaxed by doctors in the hospital, who I subsequently found out later were talking daily with Eisenhower and others about what was Patton's situation. They said, "Don't have an autopsy on him." So that's how he died. He died like 2 weeks later in the hospital. Very suspicious situation, and then no autopsy. Well, I went to the archives, the National Archives, and what I was going to do was get all the reports on his accident, on the doctor's reports, and the doctor's reports, there are those there, but there were at least 5 accident reports from when he got hit until he got to the hospital, and around those days, and they all have disappeared. They were not there. They're gone. And I know that these reports were there because they are mentioned in subsequent reports, which I know some of which were filed and are phony, and were made to kind of say, okay, here we are a year later now, 2 years later, and here's what happened to Patton. And they talk about these reports, but they're all gone. So that was where I was when I really decided, okay, no reports, no autopsy. I have the guy who says he shot him, put him in the hospital. I have corroboration of that the NKVD came in and did it. And it still wasn't enough to write a book, but digging around, I found another book written by a guy. His name was Stephen Skubic, and he had been a CIC investigator. That they were, I forget what it was, at Central, and what they were the FBI of intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
and they were over in Europe, and they put CIC investigators into into Eastern Europe, because these guys like Skubic had been born somewhere over there. He spoke the language.
Mm-hmm.
And Skubic began to get reports in his sleuthing and doing his job that the Russians wanted to kill. This is prior to the death now.
Right.
That the Russians wanted to kill Patton, and he got these from high-level Ukrainians. One of them, Stefan Bandera, who was the leader of the anti-Soviet Ukrainian movements, and Bandera was later killed. Another guy, he was a professor. His name was Small Stocky. These were high-level guys who were tuned in to the Russians because Ukraine was taken over, and they said, "Tell Patton he's going to be murdered. He's going to be murdered." I subsequently found out that Patton may have found this out himself. He may have known. He was a very fatalistic guy and was realized that he was a target. But anyway, Skubic took his information to Donovan. Mm-hmm. Donovan being the high level, the highest intelligence guy, and Skubic thought, I'm going to save Patton's life. We got to get the whole story here, and Donovan threw him in jail. Mm-hmm. Donovan threw him in jail. Now, Donovan was an opportunist. Yeah. Why would he do something like this? Why would he be involved in this plot? Like I've told you, Donovan was an opportunist, and he came hat in hand to the Soviets. He wanted to be friends with the Soviets because that's where our government was at this time. Our government was riddled with communists at very high levels, right at the top, around FDR. And FDR thought that Stalin was some great person who was going to help the world become peaceful. FDR's idea was that with America and Russia together, we'll have the United Nations and every problem will be fixed and so on. So they were all in on this thing. Mm-hmm. And anyway, what I'm explaining is why Donovan would have done something like this, why he would have gone along with his bosses, because I don't think it was Donovan's idea, as you can read in the book. It was higher level. He was told to do this. And Donovan threw him in jail, threw Skubic in jail, scared him to death, told him he'd kill him if anything is going to, he's very, scared him enough that Skubic lived underground after the war for 2 years. He came home here and he was afraid he was going to be murdered. Well, subsequently, and Skubic rises and finally becomes part of the Reagan administration. He becomes a liaison with Eastern European peoples, and so he's a credible guy. And just as Bozzato was, I don't think I mentioned, but Bozzato worked for John Lehman under Reagan. So here are two credible guys, and I found this book that years later Skubic had written, and it was called "The Murder of General George S. Patton." Mm. Skubic was not a writer. It was a tough book to read, and he'd written it only for his children. It never would have gotten published. It was redundant. But I took that book and I outlined it, and it was dynamite. It told me so much about what was going on the Russian side. And by the way, Skubic and Bazada never knew each other. They're totally different people. So you got it from two different sources here.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that book, and I had enough to write my own book out of by outlining it and seeing what he had done. He actually, Skubik was a hell of a guy. He went right into the Russian general who was head of what was going on there, and said, "I know what you're going to do." And the general was. It was really something, but it was enough to really give me a book, to give me substantial. I've got two credible witnesses who did this, and then you go on, and let me just say that one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to go and look at the car that Patton's Cadillac, which
Mm-hmm.
they have at the Patton Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And I could look. I probably see some blood from the neck on it, and all of that stuff. And so I took I got an expert on Cadillacs, and the two of us went to it's Fort Knox. They
Mm-hmm.
have the Patton Museum there,
Mm-hmm.
and the museum was very good. Yeah, you can go look at the car, and you can. They don't let people in there, but you guys can go and give it a once. And as I began to look at the car. There's no blood in it. It's all nice and everything. And my Cadillac expert, and when I say Cadillac expert, this is a guy who works for Cadillac in Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
where they make the Cadillacs. He knows. He begins to look at this and he says, "This is not a 38. It's a 39." And then we to make a long story short, down in the chassis, every automobile ever made has a long number where
Mm-hmm.
they can identify it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This number has been chiseled out. It's been filed away. This is obviously a fake car. It's not the car that Patton was hurt in. And that said to me, for sure, somebody has changed this. Why would they do it? Are they trying to sell the car to some unknown guy who would there are millionaires who would say, "I'd like to have the car,"
Right.
and so they faked it and so on. Well, I don't think that's what happened. I think what happened was they switched cars.
They were deep six in the evidence.
Absolutely. And there's, I'm sorry, you had a question?
Well, Bob, so when there's a crime, one of the things you always look at is, well, who benefited from the crime? So you mentioned one of the beneficiaries of the murder of George Patton was Russia. And one of the other beneficiaries was, well, the entities that called the hit on Patton,
Absolutely.
because they obviously had something to gain. Now, let me talk about another potential.
And one more beneficiary, those who conducted our war like Eisenhower
Yeah.
and killed a lot of people.
So my dad, who served in the United States military during World War II, was a big supporter of General Patton's. My dad served in Europe during World War II. He had the highest regard for General Patton. And many years ago, long before I met Bob, my dad said to me, and I was with a group that was going to Europe, and he said, "Dave, a couple things. One, be safe. Two, have fun, but not too much fun. And number three, I need you to do me a favor. When you are in Luxembourg, I am going to give you a place you need to go to. It is the grave of General George Patton. I want you to go to his grave. I want you to say a prayer, and I want you to salute him from me." And he goes, "I'm going to tell you one other thing. I believe that if General George Patton had not died," this is what he told me, Bob, "I believe Eisenhower never would have become president." Now, what's your take on that statement?
I think that's dead on, because that's my point with, he was going to tell the story of how the war could have ended in late 44. Think of the American lives that would have been saved. all those guys at Bastogne and the Battle of the Bulge.
Mm-hmm.
The Battle of the Bulge was a catastrophe caused by Ike.
Mm-hmm.
Ike set up our rest and recuperation in the Bulge area. He didn't realize, and Patton kept telling him, "Don't do this. Those guys are," and the same guys that Patton chased out of France and could have annihilated at Falaise, came back at Bulge and almost kicked us off of Europe again. Luckily, Patton, the Bastogne story is those wonderful guys who held them off for a while and said nuts when they were asked to surrender. Mm-hmm. But the unknown story is that Patton diverted his forces 75 degrees up. And it was an amazing thing. If you saw the Patton movie, you saw him out there directing traffic and so on. Mm-hmm. He did. Mm-hmm. He went up there and he rescued those guys at Bastogne. If he hadn't have done that, so Patton was going to tell the story, and it would have killed Eisenhower for sure. Eisenhower was a great diplomat, a bad strategist, and a bad soldier. Patton, he had that old thing about blood and guts. Blood and guts came because Patton was so good. His idea was you hit him hard, fast, relentlessly, and that's why you got the blood and guts, but it saved lives. Saved lives. That's why your father liked him, because the guys out fighting the war knew that if I had Patton with me, I got a better chance of coming back in a fight.
My dad used to say Patton was a unique general. He covered the backs of every guy on the front line.
This is true. This is why they loved him, because he was a soldier's soldier, a fighter's soldier, and he saved lives. Mm-hmm. And that blood and guts thing is erroneous. He saved lives, but even then they had the press. When he slapped that guy who had legitimately had what do you call it?
PTSD,
shell shock.
PTSD.
And Patton couldn't abide by that. Patton said, if you're in the war, you're going to fight, and he didn't know about it, so he slapped the guy, and they murdered him for it. So that was just his persona.
But have you ever been contacted by General Patton's family?
I contacted General Patton's family. That was one of the things I did, and they would not talk to me. They said, we don't believe this. We don't want you. We're not going to. I mean, through a spokesman or whatever, but they wouldn't answer my questions. They just didn't want to hear it. And I believe it's been a while now. I believe it was the son. The son got the son had a Bazada went and met with the son and told the son the same thing that I've been telling you, and the son who became a general said, I do not believe this. It didn't happen. He was not. And you can understand their situation. And the feeling I got was Patton's reputation would be tarnished if we even allowed this thing that he was murdered to come out. That was the feeling I got.
Or another Patton family member would be murdered.
Well, that I don't know.
But that's another reason. Okay, look, if you want to talk about Dad getting murdered, well, maybe somebody's getting up talking about you. I mean, this is how they work, Bob. Right? Hey, bad things happen to families.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. One other thing in answer to your question is that I did get in contact with a granddaughter of the Pattons. She's a big Patton and so on, and she's the one who's told me that she took a trip to Europe, and I don't remember the details, but she was in contact with a NKVD guy.
Right.
What are they now? They're called
well, it was a KGB, and then it was
a KGB guy,
and then
I believe, and he told her that's all true. He was murdered in the hospital. she was not with the immediate family, you know, that turned me down. But
so now let's talk about another book you wrote recently, Japan's Second War.
Secret
War. Educate our listeners on that book.
Yeah, Japan's Secret War, and I'll pull it over here. I've written 3 editions of the thing, and it's the 3rd edition that anyone wants to read about, because, you know, it's a myth that Japan were only the victim of the atom bomb. Japan tried very hard to make an atom bomb. They had a big program at the end of the war, may have actually fired off a test bomb off the coast of Korea, which they owned at that time, but too late. The Russians came in and took it over. Whatever the atomic programs, which is very well established in my book, whether or not they actually fired off one is still a matter of we're trying to find out, but it was certainly reported that way. They had a tremendous program in Korea, and the Russians came in and took it over. And you remember, the Russians didn't get into the Pacific War, until the very end. And the reason was, in my opinion, they knew what was going. This is right next to them. The Korea up at the top,
right,
borders Russia. They knew exactly what was going there. They came in, they took over Korea, and they kept. You remember, they shot down our planes, even to get near. It was a total blackout. Nobody knew what was going on in Korea for 5 years after. They wouldn't let us in there and so on. They shot down our planes, and it was Russia who got the bomb next. They got the bomb in 1948, and there are CIA documents which say they got it earlier. So my point here being, Japan worked very hard to get an atom bomb. At the end of the war, it became a priority. This has all been covered up. No one knows this, because right after the war, we realized shortly, within a year, that Soviet Russia was going to be our enemy, and we needed Japan as our bulwark, as our jumping off place. We needed bases there, and we made a deal with them. No problem. Nobody's ever going to hear that you were working on an atomic bomb, because the Japanese people themselves, the higher up guys, didn't want their own people to know that they too were working on a bomb, the same thing that devastated themselves. So that's what Japan wanted. We said, fine, we'll keep it secret. And it's secret to this day that they were working on this. But in my book, we go through the whole thing. And early on in the war, Japan was an industrialized nation, very smart nation, very smart scientists. They knew the possibilities of an atomic bomb. But when the war started, they figured we'd be out of it in 6 months. You know, it's nothing we're going to be doing. There were Japanese who worked with our key guys, Einstein, up until the war when they were banned. They had to go back home, but they knew all about what was going on. They knew that a bomb could be made. They knew the possibilities and so on. But Japan thought, no, we're not going to need this. But as the war drug on, it became a top priority. And by the end of the war, they were going to use it on our invasion fleet. And that's why they were rushing so hard in Korea. It's Konan, Korea. It's an area on the coast where a huge complex was built. And after the Korean War, when the Korean War started, we began to do real intelligence, and that's when. And I have many CIA documents which talk about the atomic works in Korea and what the Japanese had done and how they had fired this off. In 1946, there was a huge story which was on every front page in America, and it was that the Japanese had made a bomb in Korea, and had fired it off, test fired it, but that the Russians had taken it over. This was the result of a intelligence guy who was working for the U.S., who was also a very well-known journalist. His name was David Snell. He became a very celebrated journalist. He wrote this story, and he had met a Japanese in Korea who told him all about the secret plant in Korea where they had worked on the atomic works. But it all got buried when we made the deal with Japan, that if they help us against the Russians, we won't tell this story. So that's a nutshell about my book. Now, we can go through the whole history of Japan doing it. They had a point. They had a program like we did, but the big problem for Japan was not how to make a bomb, the physics of it. They knew how to do it. It was gathering the materials. We, in our country, for various reasons, had lots of uranium, not lots of uranium, but we had acquired
Enough
uranium. And we had it. They didn't have that. They had to dig for it. They had to go all over the world, and we were sinking their ships. So where we had a contained program within our borders, they had one that was in Korea. They had a program in Manchuria. They had a program in China, all of which were supplying, but getting uranium was very, very hard. And I subsequently think that they used other fissionable sources to use that to make their bomb. And I think it ultimately was a combination, kind of a dirty bomb kind of thing. And the descriptions of the tests that they did off of Korea, they put it on a barge, and it was more like you don't want people around it because it was so hot. And they took it out 20 miles out into the Korean Sea and the Sea of Japan, and blew it up. But that's when the Russians were coming down on them when that happened. And there are CIA researchers who helped me with this. By the third edition, they had read my stuff. We never got onto this story, first of all, because it was not allowed to tell this story. It was all censored stuff. And then when we started looking into what North Korea was doing in the Carter administration, and then the other guy, several administrations on down, they all didn't look at what had happened in North Korea. Because remember, when the Russians left North Korea, left their atomic works, it was all spent. They'd taken what they wanted out of that. They gave it to North Korea. And by the way, the first North Korean atomic works are at Konan, Korea, on the old remnants of what they got from the Russians. But by this time, when Carter took over, when is this? The 60s or something? They really didn't have any good history other than what was in the CIA that was speculating. For instance, during World War II, we actually during the Korean War, we actually sent bombing missions to Konan, which had on their what they're going to do is bomb the atomic works at Konan. So this was all known, but by the time the Carter administration had to deal with North Korea as a threat to us, it was all covered up. And the Carter administration kind of wanted to be nice with North Korea. So they never went any. Your histories begin about the late 50s of when North Korea began to build their bomb. They missed that whole 10 years, 1945 and prior, and then 1955, when all of my book shows that the Japanese had that plant there, and that the North Koreans took it and built their own program on it. And one of the big problems for us today is because of that gap, we don't know where they are keeping all of their nuclear missiles. And this is where my CIA guys today, they help me, and they're in this book. They say, we don't know if war comes, we may miss silos because we never plotted them correctly from the very beginning. So that's I got to take a water.
Well, no, so Bob, it's interesting. What are the possibilities that there's a link between what happened in your book with Patton and the deals that were cut with the Russians and what you expose in this book, Japan's Secret War? For example, Japan developing this A-bomb, right? It ended up in the hands of the Russians, right?
Yes.
Now, what happens? Let's just conspiracy theory. That at the time, Patton is talking about it's the Russians that are the problem here, and we had, as you mentioned, a lot of communist sympathizers within our own government at that time. And Eisenhower, who ended up being president from 52 to 60, wouldn't have been president from 52 to 60 if Patton had come home. What if those same individuals, higher than Eisenhower's level, said, listen, we got to get rid of this guy, Patton, because guess what? He comes home and our guy's not going to get in. But if you help us do this, well, how about if our payoff to you is that you can get your hands on that A-bomb that Japan's been working on. You can have you can take that as your little payment.
This is a fascinating subject, and I never really got into it, but now that lately I have been thinking about it, and it's a fascinating subject. And let me say that there is a mystery about Patton that I didn't get into in my book, and that is right at the end of the war, he was privy to German atomic warfare discoveries.
Mm-hmm.
And because of my work, I am in contact with people who are now, believe me, the story of Germany's attempt to make an atomic bomb is untold.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I know an assistant who worked with me on my book. He's an expert on that. And I ran into a lot of stuff. They did a lot of work, the Germans did, atomic work.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a crossover here that is touched on in many ways. You just expressed it in a way, that I hadn't yet, put into words yet, but it's not so fantastic. It may have happened. There's so much that we don't know that happened at the end of the war.
Right.
We were dealing for the German guys who knew all about how to make it. And we suppressed their story, and they came over here.
Yeah, Werner von Braun with the missile technology, right? His entire crew, right?
There's an untold story there. I'm just getting bits. My books are digging into it, and we didn't get into one more thing in the Japanese story. The last submarine to leave Germany, ironically called the U-234, which is another way to describe uranium that is fissionable.
Right.
It had on it German scientists. A German general who was involved in making the German bomb, and it also had uranium on it. The exact nature of that uranium, I'm not sure of, but I think it was already enriched so that it could have been used in a bomb. And it was taken, rather than go all the way to Japan, as it had been negotiated to do so, and help Japan with their project.
Now, where did it end up, Bob?
It ended up here in Portsmouth, and all of that has been kept secret as well. It was just a crash secrecy thing on it, except that one of the high-level guys in our program before he died, he revealed that he said that that some of the uranium there was used in one of the bombs to drop on Nagasaki or Hiroshima. I can't remember which. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of this story, and it's great that you put the two together, because only lately, after writing those books, and I'm digging and digging, have I realized that there are connections that I have not yet even gotten into yet, but that I'm touching. Mm-hmm. I'm touching by people that I know who are involved in this story, Japan's Secret War.
Bob, what's the best way for folks to follow your efforts and to get your books?
Well, please, my website is Robert K. Wilcox. Is it robkwilcox.com? Or, maybe I don't go there often, except to answer my mail.
Robert K. Wilcox.
There you go. Thank you very much, Dave. I better remember my name here. But Amazon runs the world, so why not go there? That's the quickest way. Put my name in, put my books' names, Target Patton, Japan's Secret War. But my name is the best there, because it'll bring up all my books, and that's the best place to go. I hate that Amazon runs the world. They run me. I'm dependent on them saying nice things, or at least putting good reviews of my books and stuff, allowing them, and sometimes they won't.
Right.
So depending on how it goes with the latest politics, but generally they've been pretty good to me. So but folks can see me as a little fish.
But folks can always go to robertkwilcox.com.
There you go. There you go.
Bob, I'd like to thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. I look forward to your forthcoming books as well. I'd like to thank you for your generosity today and spending so much time with us and really educating and empowering every one of our listeners, because your presentations always give people a different look at historical events. And in so doing, it actually makes events that are occurring today, brings them actually into a different light as well. Because, as my mom used to say, the history teacher, history doesn't repeat itself, Dave, but it does rhyme. And I thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, and you're doing the same, and I appreciate so much being able to discuss the books on your show. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Bob, for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. I thank you, folks, for joining us. Until next time, Dave Janis signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.